Sometimes the cruelest joke becomes the greatest gift. In the boomtown of Fool's Gold, the whole town gathered to laugh at one man's misfortune. When Cal, Quiet Riggins, received a condemned saloon as a cruel prank, everyone expected him to leave in shame. The Last Laugh Saloon was nothing but rotting wood and peeling paint abandoned for a decade. But Cal accepted the deed with a knowing smile. He wasn't just another drifter. He was a retired acoustic engineer from opera houses back east, and he knew something nobody else did. What lay beneath those broken floorboards that would turn the town's laughter into stunned silence? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The high desert sun beat down on Fool's Gold like a hammer on an anvil, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust and broken dreams. It was 1887, and the silver boom that had built this town was showing its age, though you wouldn't know it from the grand facades along Commerce Street. The buildings still stood tall and proud, their false fronts reaching toward the cloudless sky like the outstretched fingers of men who refused to admit the party was ending. Cal Riggins had arrived in town 3 days earlier on the afternoon stage, carrying nothing but a worn leather trunk, a battered carpet bag, and a patience that came from living 53 years on this earth. He was lean and weathered, with grey threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at technical drawings in dim light. His hands were precise, not calloused from ranch work, but marked with the careful wear of a man who had spent decades working with instruments and measurements. He'd taken a room at the Prospector's Rest, a modest boarding house run by a widow named Emma Walsh. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and flour, perpetually dusting her apron from the bakery she ran on the first floor. Emma had a way of reading people, and she'd sensed something different about Cal from the moment he'd signed the register. "You've got the look of a man who's run towards something, not away from it," she'd said, setting a cup of coffee before him that first evening. Cal had smiled at that, a slow expression that transformed his serious face. "That's a charitable way to see it, ma'am. Most would say I'm running from something I can't outrun." "Grief has a way of following us," Emma had replied quietly. "But sometimes a change of horizon helps us see it differently." She was right about the grief. Cal had left Boston 8 months ago, after burying his wife Margaret in the rain-soaked cemetery overlooking the harbor. 30 years they'd been married. She'd been the daughter of a textile merchant, he the son of a clockmaker, and together they'd built a life that revolved around the great opera houses of the East Coast. Cal's reputation as an acoustic engineer was unmatched. He understood something fundamental that most men never considered, that sound was not just heard but felt, that it moved through space like water through channels, and that the right architecture could transform noise into something transcendent. He designed the acoustics for the renovations of the Boston Opera House, consulted on the Philadelphia Academy of Music, and his calculations had helped make Carnegie Hall the jewel it was becoming. His most prized possession was the leather-bound acoustic journal he kept in his trunk. The book was thick with decades of notes, measurements, sketches, and calculations. Every major space he'd ever analyzed was documented there, from cathedral chapels to concert halls, each with detailed annotations about reverb times, resonant frequencies, and the particular character of sound in that space. The leather cover was worn smooth from handling, stained with watermarks from that day in Philadelphia when he'd worked through a rainstorm to capture the acoustics during a thunderstorm. Margaret had scolded him for catching cold, then sat up with him through the fever that followed. But after Margaret passed, the opera houses had felt like mausoleums. Every performance reminded him of her absence. The seats where they'd sat together, the lobbies where they'd walked arm in arm, the very sound waves he'd shaped seemed to carry her memory in ways that made breathing difficult. So he'd packed up his life into that single trunk and headed west. Fool's Gold had called to him from a newspaper advertisement. "Opportunity in the West," it had proclaimed. "Silver Boomtown seeks skilled tradesmen and professionals." Cal had no illusions about practicing his specialized trade in a mining town, but he'd been drawn by the promise of mountains, space, and the kind of anonymity that came from being somewhere nobody knew what Carnegie Hall was. The town itself was a study in contradictions. The main street boasted a genuine opera house, though it mostly showed melodramas and variety shows now. There were 3 hotels, 2 of them quite grand, and more saloons than seemed necessary for a population that couldn't have exceeded 2,000 souls. The wealth was still here, concentrated in the hands of men who'd gotten in early and diversified. Chief among them was Mayor Cornelius Blackwood. Cal had heard about the mayor before he'd ever seen him. Emma had painted the picture over breakfast that second morning, her voice low even though they were alone in the dining room. Cornelius Blackwood came here in '76 with the first silver strike, she'd explained, refilling his coffee. Smart man, I'll give him that. While others were breaking their backs in the mines, he bought up property. Built the Grand Hotel, the Gilt-Edge Saloon, the Mercantile. Now he owns half the commercial buildings in town and holds notes on most of the rest. Sounds like a successful businessman, Cal had observed neutrally. Emma's expression had tightened. Successful, yes. But Cornelius has a mean streak. He likes to remind people who's in charge, and he does it through humiliation. If you owe him money and fall behind, he won't just foreclose, he'll make a public spectacle of it. He's got a gift for finding a person's weak spot and pressing on it. Why do people tolerate it? Because he controls too much. Cross Cornelius Blackwood, and you might find your rent raised, your credit denied, your business struggling as customers are steered elsewhere. Sheriff Dawson is a fair man, but he can't do much when everything happens legally, just cruelly. Cal had filed that information away, not thinking it would matter much to him. He was just passing through, after all. Planning to stay a few weeks, maybe a month, before moving on to California or perhaps up to Oregon Territory. Somewhere he could disappear into quiet work, maybe carpentry or surveying something with his hands that didn't require so much of his heart. But then came that third afternoon, and everything changed. Cal had been walking along Commerce Street, studying the buildings with the habit of a lifetime. Even in retirement, he couldn't help but analyze structures, noting their dimensions, their materials, the way sound would behave within them. He'd paused in front of a dry goods store when a sudden gust of wind, the kind that came howling down from the mountains without warning, swept down the street like an invisible broom. The wind caught a cream-colored Stetson off the head of a portly man in an expensive suit who'd just stepped out of the Grand Hotel. The hat tumbled end over end down the street, heading directly toward a water trough where horses had been drinking. The man shouted in dismay, but he was too slow and too heavy to give chase. Cal reacted on instinct. He'd been an athlete in his younger days, and some of that quickness remained. He sprinted after the hat, his boots kicking up dust, and snatched it from the air just as it was about to land in the murky water. When he turned back, he found the portly man hurrying toward him, trailed by several other well-dressed men who'd emerged from the hotel. "My hat! You saved my hat!" The man's face was flushed, whether from exertion or emotion, Cal couldn't tell. He took the Stetson from Cal's hands and examined it carefully. Not a speck of dirt. Remarkable reflexes, friend. Just lucky timing, Cal replied. The man was studying him now, with eyes that were shrewd, despite the jovial expression. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair, a well-trimmed moustache, and the kind of expensive clothing that announced importance. "I don't believe I've seen you around town. Cornelius Blackwood, at your service. I have the honor of serving as mayor of Fool's Gold." Cal shook the offered hand. "Cal Riggins, just arrived a few days back." "Riggins. Excellent. We need more good men in Fool's Gold. Tell me, what brings you to our fair town? Business? Prospecting?" "You don't have the look of a miner." "Just passing through, really. Thought I might rest here a spell before moving on." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Cal noticed Emma standing in the doorway of her bakery, watching with what looked like concern. A young boy, Tommy, the stable hand from the livery, had paused his sweeping to observe. Sheriff Dawson, a tall man with a drooping mustache, stood on the boardwalk with his thumbs hooked in his belt. Mayor Blackwood was turning the hat in his hands, making a show of examining it. "This is a genuine Stetson, Mr. Riggins. Cost me $40 in San Francisco. Some might say it's foolish to spend that much on a hat, but I believe in rewarding quality, and I believe in rewarding those who do me kindnesses." Something in the mayor's tone made Cal wary. There was a performance quality to his words, as if he were speaking not just to Cal, but to everyone watching. "No reward necessary, Mayor. Anyone would have done the same." "Nonsense, I insist." Blackwood's eyes were gleaming now. "You know, we have a tradition here in Fool's Gold. When someone does the mayor a good turn, the mayor returns it. Now, what could I possibly give a man who asks for nothing?" He paused dramatically, as if struck by sudden inspiration. "I know, property. Every man needs property, a place to call his own." The crowd had grown larger. Cal could see several men grinning, nudging each other. Emma had stepped out onto the boardwalk, her face troubled. "That's generous, Mayor, but—" "No buts. I've decided. There's a building on 2nd Street that's been vacant far too long. The Last Laugh Saloon. Used to be quite the establishment, back in the day. It's yours, Mr. Riggins. I'll have my clerk draw up the deed this afternoon." The laughter started then, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Men were slapping their thighs, whispering to each other. One of them called out, "The last laugh. That's perfect, Cornelius." Cal looked around at the laughing faces, at the mayor's expression of false magnanimity, and he understood this was a joke. The building must be worthless, condemned, probably, or structurally unsound. The mayor was publicly humiliating him, making him the butt of the joke for the whole town's entertainment. But something else was happening too. In the back of Cal's mind, a memory was stirring. The Last Laugh Saloon, 2nd Street. He'd walked past that building yesterday evening, hadn't he? A derelict structure with boarded windows and peeling paint. He'd paused there because something about it had caught his attention. The way it sat on the lot, the angle of the foundation, the strange depression in the ground behind it. "That's very generous, Mayor Blackwood," Cal said carefully. "I accept." The laughter grew louder. Mayor Blackwood's smile widened. "Excellent. We'll make it official tomorrow. Welcome to property ownership in Fool's Gold, Mr. Riggins." As the crowd dispersed, still chuckling, Emma approached Cal with concern written across her face. "Cal, do you know what he just did to you?" "I have some idea. The Last Laugh has been condemned for a decade. The building's falling apart. It's a mean joke, and Cornelius just played it on you in front of half the town." Cal nodded slowly, but his mind was already racing through calculations. Last night, after dinner, he'd taken a walk to clear his head. He'd ended up on 2nd Street, a quieter road that paralleled the main street but saw less traffic. The Last Laugh Saloon had caught his eye immediately, not for what it was, but for where it was. The building sat at an odd angle on its lot, oriented differently from the other structures around it. That was the first thing he'd noticed. The second was the way the ground dipped behind it, a subtle depression that suggested something beneath the surface. And the third, most telling detail, when he'd stepped closer to the building, he'd heard it. A resonance. A particular quality to the ambient sound that told him something significant about the space. It was the kind of thing only someone with his training would notice, but once you knew what to listen for, it was unmistakable. He'd gone back to his room that night and pulled out his acoustic journal. He'd flipped through pages of notes from his travels, looking for a comparable phenomenon. He'd found it in his documentation of a cathedral in Baltimore that had been built over a natural limestone chamber. The acoustic properties had been extraordinary. Now, standing in the street with Emma, looking at him with pity, and the town laughing at the fool who'd accepted a condemned building, Cal allowed himself a small smile. "Emma," he said quietly, "do you know what they say about one man's trash?" She looked at him searchingly. "That it's another man's treasure?" "Exactly. And I think Mayor Blackwood just gave me the deed to something far more valuable than he realizes." Emma's expression shifted from concern to curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as jokes, and sometimes the last laugh belongs to the quiet man nobody's paying attention to." The sun was setting over Fool's Gold, painting the false fronts in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow, Cal would take possession of the Last Laugh Saloon. Tomorrow, the town would gather to watch him inspect his worthless prize. Tomorrow, Mayor Blackwood would enjoy the culmination of his cruel prank. But tonight, Cal would sit in his room with his acoustic journal and his decades of expertise, and he would plan for something the mayor couldn't possibly imagine. Because beneath those rotting floorboards, beneath the peeling paint and the condemned structure, something waited, something that would change everything. The joke was indeed going to land, just not the way anyone expected. The next morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost mocking. The sky was impossibly blue, the air crisp with the promise of autumn coming down from the mountains. Cal, dressed carefully in his one good suit, charcoal grey, showing its age but still respectable, and made his way to the mayor's office at precisely 9 o'clock. The office occupied the ground floor of the Grand Hotel, a corner room with large windows that allowed Mayor Blackwood to watch the comings and goings of Commerce Street. When Cal entered, he found the mayor behind an ornate desk, flanked by 2 of his associates' men, whose names Cal didn't know, but whose smirking expressions he recognized from yesterday's crowd. "Mr. Riggins, punctual. I admire that in a man." Blackwood gestured to a chair. "Please sit. This won't take but a moment." A clerk, a nervous-looking young man with ink-stained fingers, sat at a smaller desk with papers spread before him. He kept glancing at Cal with what looked like sympathy. The deed itself was a single sheet of heavy paper, official and imposing despite the worthlessness of what it represented. The clerk had prepared it with elaborate script, and as he read the description aloud, Cal noted every detail. The Last Laugh Saloon. Lot 47 on 2nd Street, building and all improvements thereon, all rights, privileges and appurtenances. That last word caught Cal's attention. Appurtenances. Everything belonging to the property, including, and this was the important part, what lay beneath it. "Sign here, Mr. Riggins," the clerk said, sliding the document across the desk. Cal took his time reading it. This was partly theatre he needed to play the role of the naive fool for just a little longer, but partly genuine caution. He wanted to ensure there were no hidden clauses, no restrictions that would limit what he could do with the property. "All improvements and appurtenances," he said aloud. "That means everything on and under the property." One of the mayor's associates snorted. "What do you think is under there, friend? Buried treasure?" Cal met the man's eyes calmly. "I like to understand what I'm signing, that's all." "It's standard language," the clerk said quietly. "The property is yours, complete and entire, though I should mention, Mr. Riggins, that the building has been condemned by the town council. You won't be able to operate a business there without extensive repairs and passing inspection, which would cost more than the property's worth," the other associate added helpfully. "You'd be throwing good money after bad." Mayor Blackwood leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, watching Cal with amusement. "Of course, no one's requiring you to accept this deed, Mr. Riggins. If you feel the property is more burden than gift, I'll understand completely. We can tear this up right now. No hard feelings." It was a test, Cal realized. The mayor wanted to see if his joke would be rejected, if Cal would back down and provide an even better punchline for the town's entertainment. The humble newcomer, realizing he'd been had, trying to gracefully decline the poisoned gift. Cal picked up the pen. His signature was steady, each letter formed with care. "I appreciate the generosity, Mayor. I accept." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Blackwood laughed, a booming sound that filled the office. "Excellent, spoken like a true optimist. Maybe you'll prove us all wrong, Riggins. Maybe you'll turn that wreck into something after all." The clerk pressed the town's seal into hot wax at the bottom of the deed, and just like that, Cal Riggins became a property owner in Fool's Gold. The paper was still warm when he folded it carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. "Will there be a public presentation?" one of the associates asked the mayor. The boys at the gilt edge were hoping to see Riggins take possession. Blackwood's eyes lit up. "Wonderful idea. Mr. Riggins, would you do us the honor? Let's say noon, at the property. Give folks a chance to witness this historic moment." Cal understood exactly what was being arranged, a public spectacle, the town gathering to watch him inspect his worthless prize. But he also understood that he needed witnesses. When the truth came out, he wanted there to be no doubt about what had happened, about who had owned what and when. Noon would be fine, he agreed. By 11:30, the word had spread. When Cal arrived at the Last Laugh Saloon, carrying his carpet bag and his leather-bound journal, he found a crowd already gathering. It seemed half the town had found an excuse to be on 2nd Street. Men leaned against buildings across the way, women watched from porches, children perched on fence rails. The mood was festive, anticipatory. Mayor Blackwood arrived in a carriage, making an entrance. He was accompanied by several town councilmen and a man Cal recognized as the town's newspaper editor. Emma was there too, standing to one side with Tommy the stable boy. Sheriff Dawson watched from the shadow of an overhang, his expression unreadable. The Last Laugh Saloon looked even worse in the harsh noon light. The paint had peeled away in long strips, leaving the bare wood beneath grey and weathered. The front porch sagged dangerously, and several of the window boards had rotted through. Above the door, a sign hung at an angle, the painted letters barely visible: "Last Laugh." "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Blackwood's voice carried across the street, "we're here to witness the transfer of property to our newest citizen, Mr. Cal Riggins. Cal, my friend, the building is yours. Please, inspect your new acquisition." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "Don't fall through the floor." Another voice added, "Better check for rats first." Cal set down his carpet bag and approached the building slowly. He could feel every eye on him, every person waiting to see how he would react to the full reality of what he'd accepted. He tested the porch steps carefully they held, though they creaked alarmingly, and made his way to the door. The lock had long since rusted away. The door swung open with a groan that set the crowd laughing again. Inside, the darkness was almost complete. What little light entered through gaps in the boards revealed a scene of utter decay. The bar still stood along one wall, but it was warped and water-damaged. Tables and chairs lay in broken heaps. The air smelled of rot and abandonment. But Cal wasn't looking at the furniture. He was looking at the floor. The floorboards were mostly intact, though several had rotted through near the walls. More importantly, they were original thick planks of pine, probably 2 inches thick, laid directly over the joists with no subflooring. That was significant. That meant there was space beneath them. Potentially a lot of space. He knelt down, ignoring the dirt on his suit pants, and pressed his ear to one of the boards. Then he pulled a tuning fork from his pocket, one of his tools, a C note at 256 hertzes, and struck it against the heel of his boot. He pressed the base of the fork against the floorboard and listened. The sound that came back to him was extraordinary. The board resonated with a depth that spoke of a large, empty space beneath it. Moreover, the resonance had a particular character, a warm, rich quality that suggested hard rock surfaces, probably limestone or sandstone. "What's he doing?" someone in the crowd asked. "Listening for ghosts," another replied, prompting more laughter. Cal stood and walked slowly across the floor, testing it every few feet with his tuning fork. The building was perhaps 40 feet wide and 60 feet deep. The resonance was consistent throughout, strongest in the center. He pulled out his journal and began making notes, sketching a quick diagram of the space. Mayor Blackwood appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright sunlight. "Finding anything interesting, Mr. Riggins?" Cal looked up from his notes. The moment had come. He could continue playing the fool, or he could start showing his hand. The question was how much to reveal. "It's structurally worse than I hoped," he said honestly. "The building itself will require extensive work." "Told you," Someone called from outside. Total loss. However, Cal continued, the foundation is interesting. The lot has good drainage, and the orientation catches the prevailing winds. With the right approach, this could be viable. Blackwood's smile was indulgent. Well, I admire your optimism. You'll let us know if you need anything, won't you? Perhaps some advice on where to find the cheapest lumber? The laughter followed Cal as he gathered his things and stepped back out into the sunlight. The crowd was already dispersing. The entertainment concluded. They'd seen what they came to see, the fool taking possession of his worthless prize. But as Cal walked back toward the boarding house, the deed folded in his pocket and his journal tucked under his arm, he was already making calculations. He had perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, before he'd need to show results. 2 weeks before the town's amusement turned to pity, and pity turned to forgetting him entirely. 2 weeks to test his theory. 2 weeks to see if what he'd heard in that resonance was real or just the wishful thinking of a grieving man looking for purpose. That evening, after the sun had set and the town had settled into its nightly routines, Cal returned to the Last Laugh Saloon. He brought a lantern, a pry bar, and a particular determination. The street was empty. The only sound, the distant music from the saloons on Commerce Street. Inside the dark building, Cal set the lantern on what remained of the bar and knelt by a section of floorboard in the center of the room, the spot where the resonance had been strongest. He worked the pry bar into a gap between boards, careful not to damage them more than necessary. The old nails resisted, then gave way with squeals of protest. He lifted the board away, then another and another, creating an opening perhaps 2 feet square. He held the lantern over the gap and looked down. The light fell away into darkness that seemed to go on forever, but more than what he saw, it was what he heard that confirmed everything. The ambient sound changed, opening up, taking on that particular quality that could mean only one thing. Beneath the Last Laugh Saloon, beneath the rotting boards and the condemned structure, lay exactly what Cal had suspected. A cavern. A natural acoustic chamber formed by ancient water over millions of years. And from the resonance he'd detected, it was enormous. Cal sat back on his heels, his heart beating faster than it had in months. Mayor Blackwood had given him a joke. The town had laughed at his misfortune. But what they'd actually handed him was something that couldn't exist anywhere else, a space where sound would behave in ways that no human construction could replicate. The Last Laugh Saloon was aptly named, because Cal was about to get the last laugh, indeed. The next 3 days, Cal worked alone. He arrived at the saloon each morning before sunrise and stayed until the evening shadows grew long. The town barely noticed. A few people walked past and saw him through the open door, sweeping debris or examining the walls, and they shook their heads at the futility of it all. The crazy Easterner trying to salvage the unsalvageable. Emma brought him lunch each day, sandwiches wrapped in paper, a thermos of coffee. She'd sit with him on the sagging porch steps, and they'd eat in companionable silence. She never asked what he was really doing, though he could see the curiosity in her eyes. On the 3rd day, she finally spoke what was on her mind. "Cal, folks are starting to talk. They're saying you've lost your senses, working on this place." He took a sip of coffee, considering his response. "What do you think, Emma?" She studied him for a long moment. "I think you're not a foolish man. I think you see something here the rest of us don't. But I also think you're carrying something heavy, and maybe you're trying to work it out through fixing something that's broken." Her insight caught him off guard. "You're perceptive. Comes from years of listening to people's troubles over coffee and pie." She smiled gently. "Just be careful, Cal. Cornelius doesn't like being made to look foolish. If you actually succeed at something here, he'll see it as an insult. I'll keep that in mind." But Emma's warning stayed with him as he worked. The political dynamics of a small town were something he hadn't fully considered. In Boston, his work had been purely technical: solve the acoustic problems, deliver the solution, move on. Here, every action was watched, interpreted, gossiped about. The immediate practical challenge was assessing the cavern without revealing its existence. Cal needed to know its dimensions, its acoustic properties, its structural integrity. But if word got out that there was something valuable beneath the saloon, the situation could become complicated quickly. His solution was methodical and quiet. Each evening, after the town had settled, he returned to the saloon and removed more floorboards, just enough to create a workspace. He rigged a rope ladder, anchoring it to the floor joists, and descended into the darkness below with his lantern and tools. The cavern was magnificent. The ceiling varied from 12 to 20 feet below the saloon's floor level. The space extended beyond the building's footprint in 3 directions, creating a natural amphitheater roughly 80 feet at its widest point. The walls were limestone, smoothed by ancient water into gentle curves that would reflect sound beautifully. The floor was relatively flat, with only minor irregularities. But what made it truly extraordinary was the acoustic signature. Cal set up his tuning forks at different locations, methodically testing the resonance at various frequencies. The results exceeded anything he'd achieved in his purpose-built opera houses. The reverb time was perfect, long enough to create richness, short enough to maintain clarity. The stone composition eliminated the dead spots that plagued wooden concert halls. He spent hours making measurements, filling page after page in his journal with calculations. The cavern had what acousticians called a warm signature. It enhanced lower frequencies without muddying them, while letting higher frequencies bloom with crystalline clarity. It was the kind of natural acoustic environment that couldn't be replicated with any amount of money or engineering skill. His excitement was tempered by practical concerns. The cavern was stable, there was no sign of water damage or structural weakness, but accessing it would require significant modification to the building above. He'd need stairs, proper reinforcement, and most critically, he'd need to maintain the acoustic integrity while making it safe for audiences. On the 4th morning, Tommy, the stable boy, appeared at the saloon door. He was perhaps 14, all elbows and curiosity, with hair that stuck up in unruly directions. "Mr. Riggins, Miss Emma sent me over to see if you needed help." Cal looked up from the measurements he was recording. The boy was studying the interior with wide eyes, taking in the stripped floorboards and the equipment Cal had brought in: levels, measuring tapes, surveying tools borrowed from the assayer's office. "That depends. Can you keep your mouth shut about what you see here?" Tommy straightened. "Yes, sir. I'm good at keeping secrets." "Why would Emma send you?" "She says you're a good man and that the town's being unfair. She says sometimes good men need help even when they don't ask for it." The boy paused. "Also, she says, I need to learn that there's more to work than mucking out stables." Cal couldn't help but smile. Emma was perceptive indeed. "Fair enough. Come here. I'll show you how to hold a measuring tape properly." Tommy proved to be a quick study. More importantly, he had the kind of natural discretion that came from being overlooked most of his life. Stable boys heard everything and were trained to forget most of it. By the end of that day, Cal had shown him the cavern opening and explained, in general terms, what he was working toward. "You're going to build a music hall." "In a cave?" Tommy's voice was hushed with awe. "Not build. Use what's already there. Nature did the hard work millions of years ago. I'm just making it accessible." "And you're not going to tell anyone yet?" "Not yet. First, I need to prove it works. Then I need to figure out how to make it safe and practical. Only then can I reveal what's here." "Why not tell them now? Seems like they'd stop laughing at you." Cal considered how to explain it. "Tommy, if I tell people now, what happens? Mayor Blackwood might claim there was a misunderstanding about the deed. Other property owners might suddenly remember they have rights to the land. Lawyers would get involved. By the time it was sorted out, years could pass. But if I quietly restore the building, establish a business, and only then reveal the cave, well, possession is 9/10 of the law." Tommy nodded slowly, understanding blooming on his young face. "You're being smart about it." "I'm trying to be." Over the next several days, the work developed a rhythm. Tommy helped during his free hours, learning as he went. Cal began the surface-level restoration that anyone watching would expect, patching the worst holes, replacing rotted boards, making the structure safe enough to work in. It was slow, deliberate work that looked like the desperate efforts of a man refusing to admit defeat. But beneath that surface work, Cal was doing something else entirely. He was designing a system of access to the cavern that would appear, from above, to be simple structural reinforcement. He calculated sight lines, planned for seating, sketched out how sound would travel from a performance space below, up through the building above. The biggest challenge was keeping his true purpose hidden while still making progress. Every decision had to serve two purposes: the obvious restoration work and the hidden preparation for the amphitheater. On the seventh day, Sheriff Dawson stopped by. He stood in the doorway, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching Cal work on replacing a section of wall. "Afternoon, Riggins." "Sheriff, you're putting a lot of work into this place." Cal continued, measuring a board for cutting, trying to make it respectable. "Mind if I ask what you're planning to do with it once it's fixed up?" This was the question Cal had been expecting. His answer had to be plausible without being specific. "Haven't decided yet. Maybe a boarding house, maybe just a residence. Depends on what the structure can support." Dawson nodded slowly. "Cornelius asked me to check on you, make sure you weren't doing anything that would violate the building codes." "And am I?" "Not that I can see. You're being careful about it, following proper procedure." The sheriff paused. "Between you and me, Riggins, I hope you prove that pompous fool wrong. Cornelius thinks he can toy with people like they're puppets. Would do him good to learn otherwise." After the sheriff left, Cal stood looking at the space with fresh perspective. He had allies in this town: Emma, Tommy, even the sheriff in his way. But he also had an adversary who wouldn't take kindly to being made the fool. The question was whether he could complete enough of the work before Blackwood realized something significant was happening. That night, alone in the cavern with his lantern casting shadows on the ancient stone walls, Cal made a decision. He would need help, real help, from people with skills he didn't possess. That meant bringing more people into his confidence. It was a risk, but continuing alone would take too long. He had 2 weeks of work behind him. Perhaps 4 more weeks until he could demonstrate what he'd discovered. 4 weeks to turn the town's joke into something that would change everything. 4 weeks to ensure that the last laugh was truly his. Finding the right help required careful consideration. Cal needed craftsmen who were skilled enough to execute his plans, but discreet enough to keep quiet about what they were building. More than that, he needed people who had reason to want Mayor Blackwood taken down a notch or two. Emma provided the key connections. Over coffee one morning, Cal explained that he needed a carpenter and possibly a stonemason, people who could be trusted. She didn't hesitate. "Jacob Mueller. He's a German carpenter who came here 5 years ago. Does beautiful work, but Cornelius spread rumors that he overcharges, steered business away from him. Jacob barely scrapes by now. And for stonework, there's Patrick O'Brien, Irish fellow. Knows more about rock and foundation than any man I've ever met. Cornelius refused to pay him full wage on a job last year, claimed the work was substandard, even though it was perfect." Both men agreed to meet with Cal that evening, after their regular work was done. They gathered in the saloon, and Cal lit several lanterns, creating pools of light in the gloom. Jacob Mueller was in his 40s, with the powerful shoulders of a man who worked with wood all his life. His hands were scarred from tools and splinters, but they moved with the precision of an artist. Patrick O'Brien was older, perhaps 60, with white hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades working in all conditions. Cal showed them the cavern. The silence that followed their descent was profound. Both men stood on the stone floor, lantern light dancing across the curved walls, and simply stared. Finally, Jacob spoke, his accent thick with wonder. "Mein Gott, I have never seen such a thing." Patrick ran his hand along the limestone wall. Professional assessment, mixing with awe. "This is virgin rock, no cracks, no water seepage. The formation must be ancient beyond reckoning. Cal gave them time to explore, to understand the space. Then he explained his vision, an amphitheater that would leverage the natural acoustics, accessed through the building above, with seating carved into the existing stone where possible and constructed where necessary. "Can it be done?" he asked. Jacob was already examining the support structure above them, calculating loads and stresses. "Yes, the floor joists are sound enough, surprisingly. We would need to reinforce them, create proper access stairs, ensure the weight distribution is correct. But yes, it can be done. The stonework is straightforward," Patrick added, "carving bench seating here, here, and here." He pointed to natural shelves in the rock, building terraces in this area for additional seating. The challenge will be doing it quietly. That was the question Cal had been wrestling with. How much noise does stonework make? Patrick's smile was sly. "That depends on the tools you use and when you use them. Hand tools are quieter than power tools. Night work is noticed less than day work. And if a man was to make regular noise during the day, say, hammering at repairs upstairs, then some additional noise below wouldn't be remarked upon." They discussed logistics. The work would take at least 6 weeks, probably 8. They would need materials, which meant money. They would need a cover story for why multiple craftsmen were spending time at the saloon, and they would need to maintain absolute secrecy until the space was ready to reveal. Cal had some money saved, not a fortune, but enough for materials if they were careful. For the cover story, they decided that Cal was contracting out various repairs because he lacked the skills himself. Anyone watching would see tradesmen coming and going, which was entirely normal for a restoration project. "What about payment?" Jacob asked. "I do not mean to be mercenary, but a man must eat." Cal had considered this. "I can pay you standard rates for the visible work, the repairs anyone can see. For the cavern work, I propose a partnership. When we open, you'll each receive a percentage of the profits for the first 5 years. If this succeeds the way I believe it will, you'll make far more than standard wages." The two men exchanged glances. It was a risk for them, weeks of work, with only partial payment up front, betting on the success of an untested venture run by an Easterner most of the town considered a fool. "I'm in," Patrick said. "I'm too old to be playing it safe anyway, and I'll enjoy seeing Cornelius's face when he realizes what happened." Jacob nodded. "I also. But Mr. Riggins, understand this: if we are discovered too soon, Cornelius will find ways to stop us, legal ways most likely. He controls the building inspector, the town council. If he wants to shut this down, he can. Then we don't get discovered too soon." They shook hands on it, and the conspiracy was formed. Work began in earnest the next day. Jacob arrived with his tools and began the careful process of reinforcing the floor joists. To anyone watching, he was simply ensuring the building's structural integrity. In reality, he was preparing for the weight of the staircase that would descend into the cavern. Patrick's work was more delicate. He could only labor in the cavern at night, and only with hand tools to keep the noise down. He began by surveying the space with the same precision Cal had used, marking locations for seating, calculating angles and sightlines. Tommy became their unofficial assistant, running errands and keeping watch. His youth worked in their favor. Nobody paid attention to a stable boy running around town, and his presence at the saloon was easily explained as Emma sending him to help. The days developed a careful rhythm. During daylight hours, visible repairs continued. Cal and Jacob worked on replacing rotted siding, fixing the porch, making the building look increasingly respectable. At night, the real work happened below. Patrick carved seating into the natural stone shelves. Cal and Jacob built the staircase in sections, fitting each piece carefully into place. 3 weeks into the work, the first significant complication arose. Mayor Blackwood paid a visit, accompanied by the town's building inspector, a nervous man named Horace, who clearly didn't want to be there. They found Cal and Jacob replacing windows. "Mr. Riggins, still at it, I see." Blackwood's tone was jovial, but his eyes were calculating. "The building's looking much improved. I confess, I didn't think you'd get this far." It's been a learning experience, Cal replied neutrally. Horace here had some questions about your permits. The inspector cleared his throat. The mayor mentioned that you're doing substantial structural work. Town ordinance requires permits for anything affecting load-bearing walls or foundations. Cal had expected this. He'd filed the appropriate paperwork 2 weeks ago, detailing the visible repairs. I submitted the applications, repairs to siding, porch, roof and windows. No structural modifications. But you're working on the floor joists, Blackwood interjected. That's structural. Jacob spoke up, his voice steady. Reinforcement only. The joists are original and sound. We are adding supplementary support to bring them up to modern standards. It is good practice, not structural modification. Horace looked at the exposed joists, ran his hand along one, and nodded reluctantly. That appears to be accurate. Blackwood's expression tightened. Still, I think a full inspection is warranted. Horace, schedule a complete review of the property. Interior and exterior. This was the danger Cal had feared. A thorough inspection would reveal the cavern access. They needed more time. Of course, Cal said calmly. How much notice do you require? 2 weeks should suffice, Horace said, looking apologetic. After they left, Jacob let out a breath. 2 weeks. We cannot be ready in 2 weeks. Cal looked at the work still undone, the staircase half finished, the seating barely started, the acoustic testing incomplete. 2 weeks wasn't enough to finish, but it might be enough to demonstrate. Then we change the plan, he said. We don't try to finish everything. We finish enough to prove the concept, one section of seating, the stairs, and enough acoustic setup to do a demonstration. A demonstration for whom? Patrick asked, emerging from the cavern access. He'd been working below and had heard the entire conversation. Cal thought about that. For everyone. We turn the inspection into a reveal. Invite the whole town. Show them what's really here before Blackwood can interfere. It was risky. If the demonstration failed, he'd lose everything, his investment, his reputation, and his chance to build something meaningful. But if it worked, if he could prove that the cavern's acoustics were everything he believed them to be, then the town would be on his side. Even Blackwood wouldn't be able to stop a project that the entire community supported. 2 weeks, Jacob said slowly. We will need to work faster, and we will need more help. Can we trust more people? Patrick smiled grimly. In this town, there are plenty of folks who owe Cornelius nothing and would love to see him outsmarted. The question isn't can we find them, it's can we organize them. That night, sitting in Emma's kitchen over coffee, Cal laid out the situation. Emma listened, asked questions, and then made a decision. I'll help, and I know 6 others who will too, quietly, at night, under the radar. Give me 2 days to organize them. Why? Cal asked. Why risk yourself for this? Emma's expression was fierce. Because Cornelius Blackwood has ruled this town through intimidation and cruelty for too long. Because you're trying to build something beautiful, and that matters. And because sometimes, Mr. Riggins, a body has to take a stand. 2 weeks to finish the impossible. 2 weeks to prove that the joke gift was actually a treasure. 2 weeks until the last laugh would either belong to him or confirm him as the town's permanent fool. The race was on. The next 2 days transformed the project from Cal's private endeavor into something larger. Emma was true to her word, gathering a small group of trusted allies who had their own reasons for wanting to see Blackwood humbled. There was Martha, who ran the general store and whose late husband had been forced into bankruptcy by the mayor's predatory lending. There was Samuel, a former miner who now did odd jobs, and who Blackwood had publicly mocked for his drinking, a problem Samuel had overcome years ago, but the stigma remained. There was old Henry, who'd been the town's physician until Blackwood supported a younger rival doctor who gave him favorable rates. And 3 others, working people with quiet grudges and capable hands. They met after midnight in the saloon, and Cal showed them what they were racing to complete. The reaction was uniformly stunned, silence followed by immediate determination. These were people who understood what it meant to seize an opportunity. "We'll need to divide the work," Cal explained, spreading out his sketches on a makeshift table. "The staircase is the priority. Without access, nothing else matters. Then, seating for at least 40 people. Then the acoustic elements, reflectors, sound panels, proper staging area." Jacob had already organized the construction sequence. "The stairs we can complete in 4 days if we work in shifts. Samuel and I will handle that. Patrick needs 2 people to help with the stonework. Martha has a steady hand. She can help with the finishing details." The work began that very night. They established a system of shifts, some people working during the day on visible repairs, others working at night in the cavern. Cal became the coordinator, moving between both efforts, checking measurements, solving problems, and maintaining the fiction that nothing unusual was happening. During the day, the building was a hive of normal activity. Cal hired a roofer to fix the worst leaks, giving him legitimate reason to have workers and materials on site. The noise of hammering and sawing provided cover for the sounds below. Deliveries of lumber and stone were documented properly, with invoices that showed only standard restoration materials. But at night, the cavern came alive with quiet industry. Jacob's staircase took shape, a beautiful curved construction of oak and iron that descended in a gentle spiral into the stone chamber. Patrick and his helpers carved and shaped the natural stone shelves into proper seating tiers, each row slightly elevated from the one before it, creating perfect sightlines to the center floor where performances would take place. Cal focused on the acoustics. He positioned reflector panels at key points along the walls, carefully shaped surfaces that would direct sound throughout the space. He calculated the optimal placement for performers, marking the spot with a simple raised platform. Every decision was tested with his tuning forks, measuring and remeasuring to ensure the sound would travel with clarity and warmth. Tommy became indispensable. His youth meant he could move through town without suspicion, buying supplies from different vendors so no single merchant would notice unusual orders. He carried messages between workers, kept watch during night operations, and learned more about construction and acoustics in those 2 weeks than most men learned in years. But the pressure was building. Word was spreading that something significant was happening at the Last Laugh Saloon. People noticed the increased activity, the deliveries, the fact that Cal seemed to have acquired both money and help. The gossip ranged from curious to suspicious. On the 5th day, one of Blackwood's associates, a man named Vernon, who managed the mayor's hotel, stopped by during lunch. Cal and Jacob were eating on the porch, and Vernon made a show of casual interest. "Place is looking good, Riggins. Almost respectable. Getting there. Must be costing you plenty. Where'd a drifter get that kind of money?" Jacob's expression darkened, but Cal kept his voice even. "I'm not a drifter. I worked for 30 years back east, saved my wages like any prudent man." 30 years doing what? "Engineering. Buildings, mostly." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "What kind of engineering?" It was a trap, Cal realized. Blackwood was fishing for information, trying to understand if Cal had expertise that would explain his confidence in the project. Structural work, making sure buildings don't fall down. It was true enough and vague enough to be useless. After Vernon left, Jacob shook his head. "He will report back. Cornelius is getting nervous." Good, let him wonder. But that night, working alone in the cavern, Cal felt the weight of what they were attempting. In 8 days, the building inspector would arrive. In 8 days, Cal would have to demonstrate that this space could function as he claimed. And he still wasn't certain it would work. The acoustic theory was sound. He'd spent decades perfecting his understanding of how spaces affected sound. But theory and practice sometimes diverged. What if there was some property of this particular stone that interfered with the resonance? What if the dimensions, while seemingly perfect, created some harmonic problem he hadn't anticipated? He'd need to test it with actual music before the demonstration. That meant finding a musician, which meant bringing yet another person into the secret. The risks kept multiplying. Emma solved that problem with her usual directness. There's a woman named Constance who plays piano at the church. She's got a beautiful voice too. Her husband left her last year, just up and disappeared, and Cornelius made sure everyone knew. He thought she'd driven the man away with her ambitions. She'd help if you asked. Constance Reed was in her 30s, with elegant hands and a quiet dignity that reminded Cal of Margaret. When he approached her after church services, he was direct. "Mrs. Reed, I'm working on a project that requires testing some acoustic properties. I need someone with genuine musical talent. Emma speaks highly of your abilities." She studied him with intelligent eyes. "This is about the saloon everyone's gossiping about?" "Yes." "What kind of acoustic properties?" Cal made a decision. "The kind that might make this the finest natural performance space west of the Mississippi. But I need to test that claim before I make it public. Would you be willing to come see what I'm working on?" She came that evening, after the day workers had left, but before the night shift arrived. Cal lit the cavern with every lantern they had, and the space glowed like a cathedral. Constance stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring upward at the curved stone walls, at the carved seating, at the impossible beauty of it. "My God," she whispered, "I didn't know such places existed." "Neither did I, until I found this one, but I need to know if it works for music. Will you sing something?" She moved to the center spot he'd marked, the optimal position for performance. She took a breath, and then she sang a hymn, something Cal recognized from childhood. Her voice was pure and strong, and the cavern took that sound and transformed it into something transcendent. The tone bloomed, filling the space with warmth. The reverb was perfect, long enough to add richness, but not so long that notes blurred together. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around listeners like a physical presence. When she finished, there were tears on her cheeks. "I've never heard myself sound like that," she said. "I've never heard anyone sound like that." Cal felt something release in his chest, the fear he'd been carrying that this might not work, that he'd been chasing an impossible dream. But Constance's voice had proved it. The cavern wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. "Will you help me?" he asked. "For the demonstration, we'll need someone to perform, to show people what this space can do." She nodded. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to invite the entire town to watch the building inspection, and when they're all gathered, expecting to see me fail, I'm going to show them this. Cornelius will try to stop you. He'll try. But if we do this right, if we show the people of Fool's Gold what's really here, he won't be able to. Public opinion is a powerful thing." Constance smiled, and it transformed her face. "When do we start?" "Rehearsing." Over the next 3 days, they worked with desperate intensity. The staircase was completed, the seating for 40 was carved and finished. The acoustic panels were positioned and tested. Cal rehearsed Constance on where to stand, how to project, what songs would best demonstrate the space's properties. But with 3 days remaining before the inspection, disaster struck. A delivery of lumber, the final load needed to complete the support work, was mysteriously delayed. The vendor, apologetic but firm, explained that Mayor Blackwood had paid a premium to redirect the lumber to another project. It would be at least a week before more could be ordered. Without that lumber, the support beams for the upper seating couldn't be completed. Without those beams, the space would be unsafe for a full audience. And without a full audience, the demonstration would lose its impact. Cal stood in the cavern, looking at the unfinished section, and felt the weight of potential failure settling over him like a shroud. They'd come so far, worked so hard, and now Blackwood had found a way to interfere without directly confronting them. "We could postpone," Jacob suggested quietly. "No," Cal said. "If we postpone, Blackwood will find another excuse, another delay. He knows what we're doing now, or at least suspects. We have to proceed." "Then how do we finish without the materials?" Cal looked around the cavern, at the stone walls, at the work they'd accomplished. There had to be a solution. There was always a solution if you were willing to think differently. "We improvise." he said finally. We use what we have, and we make it work. Show me what materials we have on hand. All of them. We're going to redesign this section with what's available. It would require working through the nights. All of them. It would require creativity and risk. But giving up wasn't an option. Not when they were this close. The solution came from an unexpected source. Old Henry, the former physician, had been watching Cal's frustration and spoke up with the careful consideration of a man who'd spent a lifetime solving problems. In medicine, we call it making do with what you have. During the war, I performed surgery with tools that would make a modern doctor weep. But the patients survived because we adapted. You're thinking you need lumber to build supports, but you're standing in a cave full of stone. Why not use what the earth provided? Patrick's face lit up. Corbelling. We can create stone supports using the corbelling technique, overlapping stones to create cantilevers. It's ancient, but it's sound. The Romans built entire aqueducts that way. Cal saw it immediately. Instead of wooden beams extending from the wall to support the upper seating, they could build stone columns that rose from the cavern floor. It would actually be stronger than wood, and architecturally more harmonious with the space. How long? He asked. 2 days if we work without stopping. We have stone, we have mortar, we have willing hands. They worked through that night and the next day in shifts. Patrick directed the construction, while others carried stone, mixed mortar, and built forms. The columns rose steadily, and as they took shape, Cal realized they were creating something more beautiful than his original design. The stone pillars looked as if they'd always been there, as if they were part of the cavern's natural formation. Constance came each evening to rehearse, and her voice became the measure of their progress. As the space took final form, the acoustics shifted and settled. Each new element changed how sound moved through the cavern, and Cal made constant adjustments to his reflector panels, fine-tuning the response. On the final night before the inspection, with less than 12 hours remaining, they completed the last of the work. The space could seat 40 people comfortably, with room for another 20 to stand. The staircase was solid and elegant. The lighting, a system of carefully placed lanterns and reflectors, created an atmosphere that was both intimate and grand. Cal stood at the center of the performance space, looking up at what they'd built, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death: pride, purpose, the sense that he was creating something meaningful. "It's remarkable," Emma said softly. She'd come down with food for the workers and stayed to see the finished space. "Cal, you've built something that's going to change this town." "We've built it," he corrected. Every person here contributed something essential. Tommy was sprawled on one of the stone benches, exhausted but grinning. "Mr. Riggins, what happens tomorrow? How are you going to reveal this?" It was the question Cal had been considering for days. The demonstration had to be perfect, not just in execution, but in timing and presentation. "We let the inspection proceed normally," he explained. "Horace comes in, examines the building, sees the visible repairs. Blackwood will be with him, expecting to find violations or incomplete work. We'll let them inspect the main floor, the roof, everything above ground. Then, when they're satisfied or frustrated or whatever they'll be, I'll ask if they'd like to see the foundation work." "And spring the surprise," Jacob said, understanding. "But not just on them. I'm going to invite the whole town. Tomorrow morning, I'll post notices that there will be a public demonstration at noon, a reveal of the completed restoration project. By the time Horace and Blackwood arrive for the official inspection, there will be a crowd waiting." Constance looked worried. "Won't that anger the mayor?" "Absolutely. But if we do this privately, he can find ways to shut it down, claim it's unsafe, tie it up in legal proceedings. If we do it publicly, with witnesses, he'll have to respond in the moment. And I'm betting that what we've created here will speak for itself." The group dispersed near dawn, exhausted but ready. Cal stayed behind, alone in the cavern, making final checks. He tested the acoustics one last time with his tuning forks, adjusted 2 of the reflector panels, and ensured every lantern was filled with oil. As the morning light began filtering through the gaps in the floorboards above, he climbed the stairs and stepped out into the saloon. The building looked transformed. The visible repairs were complete: new paint, fixed windows, a solid porch. It looked like a respectable establishment, nothing more. But beneath it lay something extraordinary. Tommy arrived at 7 with printed notices, and they spent the morning posting them throughout town. Public demonstration, noon today, last laugh saloon, witness the completion of Fool's Gold's newest cultural institution. The wording was intentionally provocative. Cultural institution. It would make Blackwood furious, which would ensure he showed up. By 11, people were gathering. It started as curiosity. What was the crazy Easterner going to claim he'd accomplished? But as more people arrived, the crowd took on a festive quality. It was entertainment, after all. The joke, gift, and the persistent fool, and now some kind of grand finale. Cal saw familiar faces. Emma stood near the front with Martha and Samuel. Sheriff Dawson was there, thumbs hooked in his belt, expression neutral but eyes interested. Constance arrived quietly, dressed simply but carrying herself with the dignity of someone about to perform. At 5 minutes to noon, Mayor Blackwood's carriage arrived. He stepped down with Horace the inspector, and his expression when he saw the crowd was a mix of surprise and calculation. Vernon and 2 other associates flanked him. "Quite the turnout, Mr. Riggins," Blackwood called out, his voice projecting to the crowd. "Are we here for an inspection or a circus?" Cal met his eyes calmly. "An inspection, Mayor. But since the building is now safe and restored, I thought the citizens of Fool's Gold deserved to see what their former condemned building has become." "Former condemned?" Horace looked uncertain. "Mr. Riggins, the inspection hasn't happened yet." "Then, let's begin. Shall we start with the upper floors?" Cal led them through the building methodically, the roof repaired and sound, the walls reinforced and painted, the windows replaced and properly sealed, the porch rebuilt to code. Every visible element of the restoration was documented, measured, and found acceptable. Horace made notes on his clipboard, checking items off his list. Blackwood's expression grew more confused. He'd expected to find violations, problems, reasons to condemn the work. Instead, he was watching a competent restoration. "The floor joists?" Horace asked, consulting his list. "Reinforced as discussed. You can examine them yourself." They went into the main room, where the floorboards had been relayed over the reinforced joists. It looked like any other saloon floor, solid, level, properly constructed. Cal had carefully hidden the staircase access behind a section that appeared to be a storage closet. "Everything appears to be in order," Horace said, sounding almost disappointed. "The building is structurally sound and meets current codes." "Remarkable," Blackwood said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "You've successfully restored a building to mediocrity, Riggins. Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of a structurally sound, completely ordinary saloon in a town that already has too many drinking establishments." The crowd had followed them inside, packing the main room. Cal could feel the anticipation, the waiting for whatever punchline would conclude this story. "Actually, Mayor, this isn't a saloon, and the restoration isn't what I wanted to show people." He walked to the storage closet and opened the door, revealing the top of the staircase descending into darkness. "The building was never the point. What lies beneath it is." Blackwood's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "What have you done?" "I'd like to invite everyone to descend these stairs and witness what nature provided and what your generous gift made accessible." Cal looked directly at the mayor. "After you, sir. I insist." For a moment, Blackwood seemed ready to refuse. But the crowd was pressing forward, curious now, and to refuse would be to admit fear or uncertainty. He straightened his jacket and approached the stairs. "Lead the way, Riggins. Let's see what you've wasted your time on." Cal lit a lantern and began the descent. The staircase could accommodate them 2 abreast. and people followed in a line. He heard gasps as the first of them emerged into the cavern and saw what waited below. The lanterns he'd positioned throughout the space were already lit. Tommy had seen to that. They illuminated the carved stone walls, the tiered seating, the central performance area. The cavern glowed like something from a dream, ancient and new at once. People spread out, staring at the walls, touching the stone benches, looking up at the natural ceiling. The conversations were hushed, reverent even. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Blackwood stood in the center of the space, turning slowly, his expression unreadable. "You found a cave, a natural amphitheater," Cal corrected, "with acoustic properties that surpass anything that can be built. Mayor, you gave me this property as a joke, but what you actually gave me was access to one of the finest natural performance spaces in existence." Sheriff Dawson was examining the stonework, running his hand along the carved seating. "This is solid construction. This is real." "It's a hole in the ground," Blackwood said, but his voice lacked conviction. Cal looked at Constance and nodded. She moved to the performance spot, and the crowd quieted, sensing something was about to happen. In the hush that fell, her voice rose, clear and pure, filling the space with music. She sang "Amazing Grace," and the cavern transformed that simple hymn into something transcendent. The stone walls captured every note, enriched it, and returned it in a perfect bloom of sound. People stood transfixed, many with tears on their faces, as they experienced music in a way they'd never imagined possible. When the last note faded, the silence was absolute. Then someone began to applaud, and the sound built until the entire cavern rang with it. Mayor Blackwood's face had gone pale. He understood now what had happened, what Cal had built, and what it meant. The joke gift had become something valuable. The fool had become something else entirely. And there was nothing he could do about it. The applause was still echoing when Mayor Blackwood found his voice. "This is remarkable, I'll grant you that, Riggins. Truly remarkable. But let's discuss the practicalities." His tone had shifted, no longer mocking, but calculating. A natural cave, no matter how impressive, requires significant safety considerations, permits for public assembly, insurance, structural certification by a qualified geologist. These things take time and money. Cal had anticipated this. "I've already consulted with a geologist from Denver. His report should arrive next week, but his preliminary assessment was that the formation is stable and safe. As for permits and insurance, I'm prepared to pursue those through proper channels." Of course. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes, and during that pursuit, which could take months, perhaps years, the property would remain closed to public use. Such a shame, after all this work. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward. "Cornelius, the man's followed every regulation, passed your inspection, built something the town's never seen. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" "Public safety, Sheriff. Surely you don't want to see citizens injured because we rushed to judgment about an underground space." The crowd was listening now, the mood shifting from wonder to unease. Blackwood was good at this, planting seeds of doubt, making people question what they'd just experienced. Emma spoke up, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Folks have been climbing around in caves since the beginning of time. This one's got proper stairs, good lighting, and solid construction. Seems safer than half the mines around here." "Mrs. Walsh, mines are regulated by territorial law and require constant inspection. This," Blackwood gestured around the cavern, "this is unprecedented. We have no framework for it." Cal felt the situation slipping. Blackwood was doing exactly what he'd feared, using bureaucracy as a weapon. The mayor couldn't deny the cavern's existence or its remarkable properties, but he could smother it with regulations and delays. Then Horace the inspector cleared his throat. "Actually, Mayor, there might be a precedent." Everyone turned to look at him, and the nervous man seemed to shrink under the attention. "In territorial law, there's provision for natural formations that enhance property value, mineral springs, for instance, or scenic views. If a natural feature exists on private property and the owner wishes to develop it, the framework is already established. Blackwood's expression hardened. That's for established businesses, Horace. This is untested. With respect, Mayor, the law doesn't distinguish. A natural feature is a natural feature. Mr. Riggins owns the property, and the deed explicitly includes all appurtenances, which would encompass natural formations below the surface. Cal saw his opening. Mayor Blackwood, when you gave me this deed, you made it very clear that everything on and under this property was included. You were quite generous in that regard. The crowd rippled with laughter. Someone called out, "Got you there, Cornelius?" But Blackwood wasn't finished. His face had gone red, and when he spoke, his voice had an edge Cal hadn't heard before. "Very clever, Riggins. You found a loophole. But let me make something very clear to everyone here. Do you know why I gave this man a condemned building? Because I thought it would teach him a lesson about his place in this town, about not presuming too much." The cavern went quiet. This was no longer political maneuvering, this was personal anger surfacing. "You come here from back east, with your fancy education and your superior attitude," Blackwood continued. "You think you're better than us, smarter, more refined. Well, you found a cave. Congratulations. But this town doesn't need another concert hall. We have real work to do, mining, commerce, building an economy. We don't need acoustic engineers or opera houses or any of your pretentious Eastern nonsense." Cal met the mayor's eyes steadily. "You're right that I came from the East, and yes, I worked in opera houses. But I came here looking for the same things everyone else wants: a place to belong, a chance to contribute something meaningful. You gave me that chance, Mayor, even if it wasn't what you intended. I gave you nothing but trouble wrapped in a joke. You gave me a deed, legally filed, properly notarized. Everything else I did myself, with help from good people in this town who believed it was worth doing." Sheriff Dawson moved between them. "Cornelius, this is getting out of hand. The man's done good work. Let it be." But something in Blackwood's expression made Cal's stomach tighten. The mayor was too angry, too personally affronted. Men like Blackwood didn't just accept defeat. "Sheriff, I want a full investigation of this property. How did Riggins afford all this work? Where did the money come from? I want to know if there was fraud, if claims were falsified, if proper taxes were paid. You can't just—" Dawson started to say. "I'm the mayor of this town, and I have the authority to request investigations when I suspect wrongdoing." Blackwood's voice had gone cold. "Furthermore, I'm calling an emergency town council meeting for tomorrow evening to discuss whether this property poses a public hazard. Until that meeting concludes, I'm recommending that this space remain closed." Cal felt the trap closing. Even if he ultimately prevailed, weeks or months of legal wrangling would bleed his resources and momentum. By the time he was cleared to operate, the opportunity would be lost. Then a voice spoke from the back of the crowd, a voice Cal didn't recognize, cultured and carrying natural authority. "Excuse me, Mayor Blackwood. I wonder if I might offer a perspective." A man emerged from the crowd, tall, perhaps 40, impeccably dressed in a traveling suit with a walking stick. His bearing suggested wealth and education. He had the kind of face that was used to being listened to. "And who might you be?" Blackwood demanded. "Marcus Wellington. I'm a concert promoter from San Francisco. I represent several touring musical ensembles, and I'm always searching for unique venues." He looked around the cavern with evident appreciation. "I heard about a building restoration in Fool's Gold and decided to investigate. I arrived on this morning's stage. Fortuitous timing, it seems." Cal had no idea who this man was or why he was here, but he felt a sudden surge of hope. Wellington continued, addressing the crowd rather than Blackwood. "I've worked with concert halls from Boston to Sacramento, and I can state without reservation that what Mr. Riggins has discovered here is extraordinary. The acoustics are superior to venues that cost hundreds of thousands to build. With proper development, this could become a premier destination for musical performances in the Western Territories." "That's all very interesting," Blackwood said tightly, "but it doesn't address the legal questions about I'm prepared to offer Mr. Riggins a contract, Wellington interrupted smoothly. My company would book 6 performances here over the next 3 months. We would handle all permitting, insurance and legal requirements through our established channels. We've done this successfully in mining towns throughout California and Nevada. The paperwork is straightforward when you know the right people. The crowd was buzzing now. This changed everything. A legitimate businessman offering real contracts meant jobs. Musicians needed lodging, meals, transportation. Money would flow into the town. Wellington pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to Cal. Perhaps we could discuss terms this evening, Mr. Riggins. I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. Cal took the card, his mind racing. This was too convenient, too perfectly timed. But looking at Wellington's confident expression, he saw no deception, only a businessman recognizing an opportunity. I'd be happy to discuss it, Cal said carefully. Blackwood's face had gone from red to pale. He understood what was happening. The narrative was escaping his control. If Wellington's company invested in the venue, if contracts were signed and money changed hands, interfering would mean damaging Fool's Gold's reputation for business. The town council would never support that. We'll see what tomorrow's meeting brings, Blackwood said stiffly. Then he turned and pushed through the crowd toward the stairs. After he left, the atmosphere shifted immediately. People crowded around Cal, asking questions, offering congratulations. Emma hugged him fiercely. Tommy was bouncing with excitement. Even Sheriff Dawson smiled and shook his hand. But Cal found Wellington in the crowd and pulled him aside as people began filing up the stairs. Mr. Wellington, I'm grateful for your intervention, but I have to ask why. You don't know me. You don't know if this venture will succeed. Wellington's expression became more serious. Mr. Riggins, I've been in this business for 20 years. I recognize exceptional venues when I see them, but more than that, I recognize something else. A man trying to build something meaningful against powerful opposition. I was in your position once, in Sacramento. A local political boss tried to shut down my first theater because I wouldn't pay bribes. A stranger helped me then. I'm returning the favor. He paused, looking around the empty cavern. Besides, this really is extraordinary. If you'll accept my company's partnership, I believe we can make this the premier performance venue in the territories. My offer is genuine, Mr. Riggins. The contracts are real. The money is real. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next. Cal thought about that. What came next would be harder than anything he'd done so far. Blackwood wouldn't give up easily. There would be more obstacles, more challenges, more moments when failure seemed inevitable. But standing in the cavern, he discovered that good people had helped him develop, that nature had spent millions of years creating. Cal felt something he hadn't experienced since Margaret died. Not just purpose, but possibility. I'm prepared, he said. Let's discuss terms. As they climbed the stairs together, Cal looked back one last time at the space below. The lanterns still glowed, casting warm light across the stone walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since arriving in Fool's Gold, he felt like he belonged. The joke had indeed landed, but the last laugh was still to come. That evening, Cal sat across from Marcus Wellington in a private dining room at the Grand Hotel, the same establishment owned by Mayor Blackwood. There was a certain poetry to negotiating here, in the heart of his adversary's territory. Wellington spread several documents across the table. I've taken the liberty of drafting preliminary terms. 6 performances over 3 months, featuring different ensembles, a string quartet, an opera singer who specializes in arias, a chamber orchestra, and several soloists. We'll charge admission, split the proceeds 60-40 in your favor, after expenses. Cal studied the numbers. They were more than fair, generous, even. Why would you give me the larger share? Because you're taking the greater risk. Your reputation and property are on the line. My company has other venues. If this fails, we move on. If it fails for you, you lose everything. Wellington leaned back in his chair. Also, I want you to succeed. I want this venue to become permanent, which means you need capital to continue improving it. They discussed logistics, ticketing, advertising, technical requirements. Wellington's experience showed in every detail. He'd thought through problems Cal hadn't even considered yet. The first performance should be in 3 weeks, Wellington suggested. That gives us time to handle the legal requirements and begin promotion. I'm thinking we open with the string quartet, something intimate that showcases the acoustic properties without overwhelming the space. About those legal requirements, Cal said carefully. Mayor Blackwood made it clear he intends to create obstacles. Wellington's smile was knowing. Mayors always do, but there's a territorial inspector in Denver who owes me several favors. He can fast-track the necessary certifications. As for insurance, I have connections with underwriters in San Francisco who specialize in unusual venues. The paperwork will be completed properly, but efficiently. That sounds expensive. It is. But I'll cover those costs as part of our partnership agreement. Consider it an investment in future profitability. Wellington paused. However, there's something else we need to discuss. The town council meeting tomorrow. Blackwood will try to turn public opinion against you. We need to be prepared for that. Cal had been thinking about this all afternoon. What's your advice? Don't defend. Don't argue. Let the work speak for itself. Bring people who can testify about the construction quality, the safety measures, the economic benefit to the town. Make it about Fool's Gold's future, not about your conflict with the mayor. They worked late into the evening, planning strategy. Wellington had a political mind that complemented Cal's technical expertise. By the time they finished, Cal felt more confident about facing the council meeting. Walking back to his boarding house through the dark streets, Cal passed the Last Laugh Saloon. He let himself in and descended into the cavern one more time. In the silence and darkness, with only a single lantern for light, he could hear the space, breathing the subtle movement of air, the acoustic resonance that made every sound significant. He thought about Margaret. She would have loved this place. She'd always believed that music had power beyond entertainment, that it could heal, transform, unite. This cavern embodied that belief in ways no human construction ever could. I'm doing this for both of us, he said aloud, his voice soft in the darkness. I hope that's all right. The next morning brought a different kind of preparation. Emma's kitchen became a war room. Jacob, Patrick, Constance, Tommy, and several others gathered to discuss the council meeting. Cornelius will have Vernon testify that the construction was improper, Jacob predicted. He will bring his own inspectors who will claim safety violations. Can they do that? Tommy asked. Horace already approved everything. They can say anything they want, Sheriff Dawson said. He'd stopped by to offer unofficial advice. The question is whether the council will believe them over the actual inspector. Patrick was less concerned. Let them question the stonework. I have 40 years of experience. I know every structural engineer in 3 territories, and any of them would vouch for my construction. Constance had been quiet, but now she spoke up. What about the people who were there yesterday? The ones who saw the space and heard the music? Don't they have a voice? Emma nodded firmly. They do. And they'll use it. I've been talking to folks all morning. Half the town is planning to attend the meeting to support you, Cal. Cornelius may control a lot, but he doesn't control everyone. The council meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the town hall. By 6:30, people were already filling the seats. Cal arrived to find the room packed, standing room only, with people crowding the doorway and windows. The 5 council members sat at a raised table at the front. Mayor Blackwood sat to one side, Vernon and his other associates nearby. Wellington arrived precisely at 7, taking a seat near Cal. His presence caused whispers, an outsider businessman lending credibility to the enterprise. Council Chairman Harrison, a silver-haired man who owned the assayer's office, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss concerns raised by Mayor Blackwood regarding the Last Laugh Saloon property and its recent modifications. Mayor, the floor is yours. Blackwood stood, his expression appropriately grave. Gentlemen, citizens, I come before you with a heavy heart. We all witnessed something remarkable yesterday, a natural cavern with undeniable beauty. But beauty and safety are not the same thing. Mr. Riggins has created public access to an underground space that has never been properly evaluated by qualified experts. The risk to citizens is substantial, he went on, detailing potential hazards, cave-ins, air quality issues, emergency egress problems, liability concerns for the town. He painted a picture of disaster waiting to happen, of visitors trapped or injured, of lawsuits and tragedy. "I'm not questioning Mr. Riggins's intentions," Blackwood concluded. "I'm sure he believes in his project, but good intentions don't prevent accidents. We have a responsibility to ensure public safety, even when that means disappointing someone who's worked hard." Vernon testified next, claiming that the construction appeared rushed and potentially substandard. He suggested that proper evaluation would take months and cost thousands of dollars, money the town didn't have, and Riggins couldn't afford. Then Horace was called. The inspector looked deeply uncomfortable as Blackwood questioned him. "Did you perform a complete structural analysis of the cavern itself?" "No, just the building above and the access." "So you can't certify that the natural formation is stable?" "I'm not a geologist, so technically." "Thank you, Horace. So we have access to an underground space that hasn't been certified safe by anyone qualified to make that determination." The council members were listening intently. Chairman Harrison looked troubled. This was going exactly as Blackwood wanted. Then Wellington stood. "Mr. Chairman, might I be recognized?" Harrison looked surprised, but nodded. "The gentleman from San Francisco has the floor." Wellington moved to the front, with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this many times. "Gentlemen, my name is Marcus Wellington. I'm a concert promoter, and I've worked with venues throughout the Western Territories. I'd like to address Mayor Blackwood's concerns directly." He pulled documents from his briefcase. "These are geological surveys of similar natural amphitheaters in California and Nevada that my company has successfully operated in for years. The formation Mr. Riggins discovered is actually more stable than most because it's limestone rather than volcanic rock. The air quality is excellent, natural ventilation through fissures in the ceiling. Emergency egress is superior to most performance halls because there are actually 3 separate routes to the surface, including the main stairs." Blackwood interrupted. "Those are your documents. How do we know they're accurate?" "You don't have to take my word for it." Wellington produced another paper. "This is a telegram from Dr. Samuel Chen, territorial geologist in Denver. He's reviewed the preliminary surveys I commissioned and confirms the formation is structurally sound. He'll be here in person next week to perform a complete analysis, which I'm financing as part of my investment in this venue." The room buzzed with this information. Wellington had moved faster and more thoroughly than anyone expected. "As for liability," Wellington continued, "my company carries comprehensive insurance that will cover this venue during our contracted performances. That insurance required extensive safety evaluation by professionals, and they approved the space without hesitation." Chairman Harrison leaned forward. "Mr. Wellington, why is a San Francisco promoter so interested in a small-town venue?" Wellington smiled. "Because it's not a small-town venue, sir. What Mr. Riggins has discovered is potentially one of the finest natural performance spaces in North America. Musicians will travel here specifically for the privilege of playing in that acoustic environment. That means visitors, that means commerce, that means economic growth for Fool's Gold. I'm interested because I recognize exceptional opportunities when I see them." Blackwood's face was reddening. "This is manipulation. Wellington has a financial interest in pushing this through, regardless of real concerns." "As do you, Mayor," Sheriff Dawson said quietly from the back. "You own several competing entertainment establishments. This venue could draw business away from your properties." The room went silent. Dawson had said what many were thinking, but none had dared voice. Chairman Harrison cleared his throat. "Are there citizens who wish to speak?" Emma stood. "I've lived in this town for 20 years. I've watched Cornelius Blackwood use his position to punish anyone who threatens his control. He gave Cal that property as a cruel joke, expecting him to fail and leave town humiliated. Instead, Cal succeeded. He built something remarkable, and now Cornelius can't stand it. Others stood to speak. Jacob testified about the construction quality. Patrick described the structural integrity. Constance talked about the acoustic properties and the cultural value. One by one, townspeople who'd been at the demonstration spoke about what they'd witnessed. Then Tommy stood up. The 14-year-old looked small and nervous, but his voice was steady. "I helped build that place. I carried stone and held tools, and learned how proper work gets done. Mr. Riggins taught me that building something matters more than tearing things down. That's what this is really about. Some people build, and some people just try to stop others from building because it makes them feel small." The boy's words hung in the air. Even Blackwood seemed taken aback by such direct honesty from such an unexpected source. Chairman Harrison conferred quietly with the other council members. Then he addressed the room. "The council will take a 15-minute recess to discuss this matter." Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Cal stood outside with his supporters, trying to read the situation. Wellington was confident, but Cal had lived long enough to know that confidence and success weren't the same thing. When they reconvened, Chairman Harrison looked directly at Cal. "Mr. Riggins, the council has reviewed the evidence presented. We find that while some of Mayor Blackwood's concerns are valid, they can be addressed through proper procedure rather than closure. Therefore, we're granting conditional approval for your venue to operate, pending completion of the full geological survey and implementation of any safety recommendations that result from that survey." Relief washed through Cal, but Harrison wasn't finished. "However, we're also requiring that you post a bond to cover potential liability until the insurance arrangements are finalized. And we're limiting initial capacity to 40 attendees until the complete safety evaluation is done." It wasn't total victory, but it was enough. Cal could move forward. Blackwood stood, his face dark with anger. "This council is making a mistake. When something goes wrong, and it will, the responsibility will lie with all of you." He stalked out, Vernon and his associates following, but most of the room remained. And as people began congratulating Cal, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. The town had chosen his vision over Blackwood's control. They'd chosen possibility over fear. And in doing so, they'd declared that the future of Fool's Gold would be shaped by those who built things, not those who just owned them. Outside the town hall, Wellington shook Cal's hand. "Well done. The hard part is over." But Cal, looking at Blackwood's carriage disappearing into the night, wasn't so sure. Men like the mayor didn't accept defeat gracefully. There would be one more move, one more attempt to win back control. The question was what form it would take, and whether Cal would see it coming. The answer came 3 days later, at 2 in the morning. Cal had been working late in the cavern, fine-tuning the acoustic panels for the upcoming performance. The string quartet would arrive in less than 2 weeks, and he wanted everything perfect. He'd finally dozed off on one of the stone benches when Tommy's urgent voice woke him. "Mr. Riggins! Mr. Riggins! Wake up!" Cal sat up, disoriented. Tommy was at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale in the lantern light. "What's wrong?" "Fire! The Grand Hotel is on fire, and they're saying it started in the room where Mr. Wellington is staying." Cal was on his feet instantly, following Tommy up the stairs and out into the street. Sure enough, orange light flickered against the night sky 2 blocks away. They ran toward it, joining a crowd that had gathered to watch the bucket brigade working to control the blaze. The fire was contained to the 2nd floor, already mostly extinguished by the time Cal arrived. Wellington stood on the street in his nightshirt and a blanket, watching smoke pour from his window. Sheriff Dawson was questioning him. "I don't know how it started," Wellington was saying. "I was asleep. The smoke woke me." Cal pushed through the crowd. "Marcus, are you all right?" Shaken, but unharmed. Wellington's face was grim. "However, all my documents were in that room. The contracts, the insurance papers, the geological surveys, everything." The implication hit Cal like a physical blow. Without those documents, they had no proof of Wellington's claims from the council meeting. No evidence of the geological evaluation, no insurance coverage, no contracted performances. Sheriff Dawson was studying the window. Strange how it started in just that one room. Rest of the building is untouched. Mayor Blackwood appeared then, dressed hastily but composed. A terrible accident. Thank God no one was seriously hurt. Mr. Wellington, you'll understand that I'll need to close the entire hotel for safety inspection. Can't risk another fire. I'm sure you'll find accommodations elsewhere in town. The timing was too convenient, the target too specific. Cal met Wellington's eyes and saw the same understanding reflected there. How long will the inspection take? Wellington asked. Days. Perhaps a week. These things can't be rushed. Blackwood's expression was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. Of course, this raises questions about the fire safety in other buildings as well, particularly older structures, particularly those with public access to underground spaces where emergency evacuation might be compromised. There it was, the real attack. Blackwood couldn't stop them through the council, so he'd create a crisis that would require closing the venue for safety evaluation. And without Wellington's documents, they couldn't prove any of the claims that had swayed the council. Sheriff, Cal said carefully, this fire seems awfully convenient. Dawson's expression was neutral. What are you suggesting, Riggins? I'm suggesting that someone wanted to destroy those documents. That's a serious accusation, Blackwood said smoothly. Do you have any evidence? Cal didn't, and that was the problem. Blackwood had been smart enough to create plausible deniability. A fire in a hotel could be accident, arson, or simply bad luck. Without proof, accusations would make Cal look paranoid. Wellington put a hand on Cal's shoulder. Let it go. We can get replacement copies of most documents. It will take time, but it's not impossible. How much time? Cal asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll need to telegraph San Francisco, Denver, and several insurance offices. 3 weeks. The string quartet was supposed to perform in 10 days. They'd lose that booking, maybe all 6 scheduled performances. Momentum would be lost. Public confidence would erode. And Blackwood would have time to find other obstacles. The crowd was dispersing now that the excitement was over. Emma appeared at Cal's side, having heard the commotion. She looked at the smoking window, at Blackwood's satisfied expression, and her jaw tightened. This isn't over, she said quietly. Back at the boarding house, Cal, Wellington, Tommy, and Emma gathered in the kitchen. Dawn was still hours away, but none of them could sleep. He's going to use this fire as an excuse to shut down the venue, Cal said. Emergency safety inspection, same as the hotel. He'll drag it out for months if he can. Wellington nodded. And without the documents, I can't prove that we already passed safety requirements. The council will have no choice but to support the closure. Unless, Emma said slowly, we give them something else to think about. Something that makes closing the venue politically impossible. Like what? Tommy asked. Emma's expression was determined. Like a performance. Tomorrow night, invite everyone. Show them what this place can really be. Once people experience it, Cornelius won't be able to close it without causing an uproar. We don't have performers, Wellington objected. The quartet isn't here yet. We have Constance, Cal said, understanding where Emma was going, and we have 2 days to put together something that will prove this venue deserves to exist. Wellington looked skeptical. A single performer, on short notice, without proper promotion? That's not how professional venues operate. This isn't about being professional, Cal replied. This is about survival. We either take a risk now, or we lose everything to bureaucratic delays and Blackwood's machinations. They looked at each other in the flickering lamplight. It was desperate, impulsive, exactly the kind of decision that could backfire spectacularly. But doing nothing meant certain defeat. I'll talk to Constance first thing in the morning, Cal said. If she's willing, we do this tomorrow night. As the others left to catch a few hours of sleep, Cal remained in the kitchen, watching the sun begin to rise over Fool's Gold. Somewhere in this town, Blackwood was probably sleeping soundly, confident that his final move had succeeded. But the mayor had forgotten something important. He'd forgotten that the quietest men sometimes fought the hardest, that persistence could overcome power, that a town's heart belonged not to whoever owned the most property, but to whoever gave them something worth believing in. Tomorrow night, Cal would give them exactly that. Constance arrived at the saloon an hour after sunrise, still in her night robe with a shawl thrown over it. Emma had woken her with the news, and she'd come immediately. "You want me to perform tonight, in front of the whole town?" Cal nodded. "I know it's sudden. I know it's not how these things are properly done. But we're out of time and options. If you're willing, we'll make this work." She looked at him for a long moment, then at the cavern entrance. "What would I sing?" "Whatever moves you. Whatever will show people what this space can do." "And if I refuse? If I say this is too much pressure, too rushed? Then I'll understand completely, and I'll figure out something else." Cal's voice was steady. "I'm not going to pressure you, Constance. This has to be your choice." She walked to the cavern entrance and descended the stairs alone. Cal waited, giving her space to think. When she emerged 10 minutes later, her expression had changed. "I'll do it. But not just for you, for me too. I've spent years singing in a church to half-empty pews. For once, I want to sing somewhere that makes my voice sound the way I've always heard it in my head." They spent the day preparing. Word spread quickly there would be a performance that night at the Last Laugh. Free admission, open to all. By mid-afternoon, the whole town was talking about it. By evening, people were arriving early to ensure they got seats. Cal had positioned all the lanterns to create the best lighting. Jacob and Patrick had spent the day making small improvements, smoothing rough edges on the stone benches, ensuring the stairs were clear and safe. Tommy had appointed himself usher, helping people find seats and answering questions. By 7 o'clock, the cavern was full. All 40 seats were taken, with another 30 people standing at the back and along the sides. Emma was there, Sheriff Dawson, Marcus Wellington looking somewhat recovered from his ordeal. Jacob and Patrick sat with their families, Martha and Samuel and old Henry. Townspeople who'd never spoken to Cal filled the space, curious about what would happen. And at the back, having arrived last and standing separate from the crowd, was Mayor Cornelius Blackwood. Cal saw him, but didn't acknowledge him. This wasn't about Blackwood anymore. This was about showing everyone what was possible. Constance stood at the center performance spot, wearing a simple blue dress. She looked nervous but composed. Cal had discussed the program with her 3 songs, chosen to demonstrate different aspects of the cavern's acoustics. The crowd quieted. In that silence, Constance began. She started with Shenandoah, the old folk song about rivers and longing. Her voice was pure and clear, and the cavern cradled it gently. The reverb added depth without overwhelming the melody. People leaned forward, drawn into the music. Then she moved to something more demanding, an aria from Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. Her voice soared through the ornate passages, and the cavern revealed its true magic. Every note bloomed with clarity. The high notes sparkled like crystal. The low notes resonated with warmth. It was as if the stone itself was singing along with her. Cal watched the audience. He saw tears on Emma's cheeks. He saw Wellington's professional mask slip into genuine wonder. He saw people who'd come skeptically lean into the music with their whole bodies. Even Blackwood's expression had changed. The mayor stood transfixed, his earlier satisfaction replaced by something else, recognition that he'd underestimated what he was fighting against. For the final song, Constance had chosen Amazing Grace, again the hymn that had first proven the cavern's potential. But this time, at the end, she invited the audience to join her. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, voices joined in. The cavern filled with sound, not perfect, not trained, but genuine and heartfelt. 70 people singing together, their voices blending and amplifying in ways that made the simple hymn transcendent. When the last note faded, the silence was profound. Then someone began applauding, and it built like a wave. People stood, the applause echoing off the stone walls. Constance stood crying, overwhelmed by the response. Cal felt something release in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. They'd done it. They'd shown the town what this place could be. Sheriff Dawson was the first to speak afterward, addressing the crowd from the stairs. "I've been sheriff here for 12 years. I've seen a lot of schemes and dreams come through this town. This is no scheme. This is real, and it's valuable. Anyone who tries to shut this down is going to have to explain to me why." Others spoke up, declaring their support. The mood was celebratory, triumphant. Blackwood remained at the back, watching. As people began to leave, he approached Cal. His expression was complex, anger, respect, and resignation mixed together. "You won," he said simply. "It wasn't about winning." "Of course it was. Everything's about winning." Blackwood looked around the cavern one last time. "I gave you this as a joke, but you turned it into something I can't fight. That takes a particular kind of stubbornness. Or a particular kind of hope." Blackwood considered that. "Maybe. But understand this, Riggins, I don't forgive easily. You've embarrassed me in front of the whole town. That's not something I'll forget. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking to be left alone to build what I'm building. We'll see how long that lasts." Blackwood left, and Cal watched him go. The mayor would cause problems in the future, certainly, but the immediate crisis was over. The venue was safe. The performance had succeeded. The town had chosen possibility over fear. Wellington came up beside him. "The replacement documents arrived by telegraph this afternoon. I didn't want to say anything in case it fell through, but everything we need is being couriered from Denver. It'll be here in 3 days. Cal started laughing, not bitter laughter, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. So the fire didn't actually accomplish anything? Oh, it accomplished something. It showed everyone that Blackwood is scared enough to resort to arson. That's valuable information. As the last of the crowd filtered out, Cal stood alone in the cavern one final time that night. The lanterns were burning low, casting long shadows. But the space felt different now, not just discovered, but christened, made real by music and voices and people experiencing something beautiful together. He thought of Margaret again. She would have loved tonight, would have loved seeing people moved by music in this impossible place, would have loved the community that had come together to make it happen. "We did it," he whispered to the empty cavern. "The last laugh is ours." 3 months later, Cal stood on the porch of the Last Laugh Saloon on a crisp November morning, watching the stagecoach arrive with another group of visitors. The transformation of Fool's Gold had been gradual but unmistakable. The string quartet's performance had sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. The opera singer's recital had drawn audiences from 3 territories. Word spread through musical circles. There was a place in the mountains where sound behaved like magic, where even modest performers sounded extraordinary. But it wasn't just about the performances. The visitors needed lodging, meals, supplies. Emma's boarding house was full most nights now. New restaurants had opened to serve the influx. The general store had started carrying sheet music and musical instruments. The town had discovered that culture and commerce could coexist profitably. Wellington's company had extended their contract through the following year, booking 12 performances with increasingly prestigious musicians. A critic from the San Francisco Chronicle had written a glowing review, calling the Last Laugh Amphitheater the acoustic wonder of the West. Cal had used his share of the profits to make improvements. The seating now accommodated 80 comfortably. He'd installed a permanent lighting system with reflectors that could be adjusted for different performances. A small stage area had been built at the performance spot, giving musicians a proper platform. More importantly, he'd hired help. Tommy now worked for him full-time, learning not just about acoustics, but about business management. Jacob and Patrick had steady work, maintaining and improving the space. Constance had become the venue's resident performer, opening each show with a short piece that demonstrated the acoustics for first-time visitors. Mayor Blackwood had kept his distance, focusing his energies elsewhere. The fire investigation had gone nowhere, no proof of arson, but enough suspicion that Blackwood's reputation had been damaged. He still controlled significant property in town, but his political influence had waned. The council chairman had quietly suggested that perhaps someone else should run for mayor in the next election. On this particular morning, Cal was expecting a special visitor. Dr. Samuel Chen, the territorial geologist, had completed his comprehensive analysis of the cavern and was delivering his final report. The doctor arrived at noon, carrying a thick folder of documents. They sat in the saloon's main room, which Cal had converted into a modest office and reception area. "Mr. Riggins, I've completed the most thorough geological survey I've ever conducted on a natural formation. The findings are remarkable." Dr. Chen spread maps and diagrams across the desk. The cavern formed approximately 12 million years ago, when an underground river carved through a limestone deposit. The river changed course millennia ago, leaving behind this chamber. The stone composition is ideal, dense enough to reflect sound, but with enough porosity to prevent dead spots. The shape is almost acoustically perfect, as if nature designed it specifically for music. Is it safe for continued public use? Absolutely. The formation is stable. There's no water intrusion, no structural weaknesses. With proper maintenance, this space could host performances for centuries. Dr. Chen smiled. Nature created something extraordinary here. You just had the wisdom to recognize it. After the geologist left, Cal sat alone in the quiet office. He pulled out his leather-bound acoustic journal and flipped through the pages, decades of measurements, calculations, and notes from every significant space he'd ever analyzed. On a fresh page, he began documenting the Last Laugh amphitheater, but this time his notes included more than technical specifications. He wrote about the people who'd helped build it, about Emma's kindness and Tommy's enthusiasm, about Jacob's craftsmanship and Patrick's stonework, about Constance finding her voice and Wellington taking a chance on an unproven venue. He wrote about a town that had laughed at him, then slowly came to believe in what he was building, about the transformation of mockery into respect, of a joke into a legacy. That evening, as the sun set and painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber, Emma brought him dinner. They ate together on the porch, watching the last light fade. "You thinking about her?" Emma asked gently. Cal nodded. She would have loved this, not just the cavern, but everything that came from it. Margaret always believed that music could bring people together, could heal divides. It did that here. It did more than that. It gave this town something to be proud of. It gave people like Tommy opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. It gave me a reason to keep going when I wasn't sure I had one. Emma was quiet for a moment. "You ever think about going back east, now that you've succeeded here?" "No. This is home now. That surprises me. I came here planning to drift through, not to put down roots. But somewhere along the way, that changed. People have a way of surprising themselves when they're given the chance." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in town, someone was practicing piano, the sound drifting faintly through the evening air. Music was becoming part of Fool's Gold's identity, woven into its character. A month later, the first snow fell on the mountains. Cal stood in the cavern, which had been closed for the winter season. He'd spent the quiet months planning improvements for the spring, better acoustics in the upper seating, a warming area for performers, enhanced lighting. But tonight, he just stood in the silence, listening to the space breathe. The cavern had taught him something important, that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as jokes, that what others see as worthless might hold extraordinary value, and that the last laugh often belongs to those patient enough to see beyond the immediate moment. He thought about his journey from grief-stricken widower to venue operator, from outsider to integral part of a community. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built day by day, stone by stone, note by note. Mayor Blackwood had given him a condemned building as a cruel prank, expecting him to fail. Instead, Cal had discovered a natural wonder and built something that would outlast them both. The joke had indeed landed. But more than that, he'd found what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just a project or a purpose, but a home, people who cared about him, work that mattered, a future worth building toward. The Last Laugh Saloon was aptly named in ways Blackwood never intended, because in the end, the greatest laughter came not from humiliation or triumph over adversaries, but from the simple joy of creating something beautiful and sharing it with others. Cal climbed the stairs one last time that night, extinguishing lanterns as he went. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to prove that what had started as a joke had become something far more meaningful. But tonight, standing on the porch, under a sky full of stars, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He'd turned cruelty into kindness, mockery into achievement, and a condemned building into a legacy that would echo through these mountains for generations. He'd gotten the last laugh, and it had been worth every